At a glittering summit meant to celebrate unity, Jill Biden leaned in with a smile and whispered a line so cold it could crack marble. But what happened next? John Kennedy, the senator from Louisiana, answered not with rage, but with a single sentence that stunned the room, ignited a national firestorm, and uncovered a truth far darker than anyone expected. This wasn't just a clash of personalities, it was the spark that exposed a buried injustice. "Where I come from, we elect scholars?" The words slid out of Jill Biden's mouth like silk dipped in venom, just loud enough to cut through the soft jazz humming in the ballroom. Cameras flashed. Champagne glasses clinked mid-toast. And for a moment, time hesitated. Her smile held firm, sculpted and camera-ready. But the chill behind it was unmistakable. John Kennedy stood beside her, one hand still half raised in a courteous wave to the crowd. The Louisiana senator, known for his sharp quips and warm Southern cadence, did not flinch. Instead, he let the insult settle into the air like ash from a distant fire. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he smiled. It was a smile not of submission, nor surprise, but calculation. Around them, the Unity for America Women's Summit unfolded in its usual pageantry. Chandeliers glittered overhead, casting diamond-like specks across the polished marble. Political luminaries mingled, careful not to betray too much interest in the exchange, but their posture shifted, shoulders tensed, eyes darted. The photographer snapped a shot, but the moment had already mutated. It was no longer a posed symbol of bipartisanship. It was the prelude to a fracture. Kennedy didn't answer, not with words, not yet. He turned slightly toward her, just enough to let her know he had heard. Fully, his eyes, once relaxed and full of that trademark aw shucks charm, now gleamed with something sharper. Not anger, not offense, resolve, a look that didn't shout, it promised. And someone noticed, in the front row, a woman older, her silver hair pinned neatly, dressed in understated navy, leaned forward, her lips parted slightly, her brows drawing in. She didn't blink. Her eyes flicked between Jill and John, and then lingered on the senator as if trying to telegraph something. Across the room, a junior reporter, fresh from grad school and hungry for moments like this, instinctively raised her phone. She didn't know why. Not fully. But something had just shifted. The moderator's voice returned, chipper and oblivious, like a background track trying to reassert the original script. She thanked the guests, clapped politely, and motioned for the speakers to take their seats. John walked to his assigned chair without hurry, his gait steady, each step a metronome. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Behind him, Jill adjusted the sleeve of her green dress. The same hand that had gestured so casually moments earlier, now pressing firmly into the fabric, smoothing something invisible. Her expression remained poised, but her jaw had tightened. The crowd settled, but the tension didn't. In the control room above the ballroom, a young producer reviewing the camera feeds hit pause. On screen, a tight shot of John Kennedy's face smiling faintly, but eyes lit like a fuse. The producer rewound 5 seconds. Then again, that look, he whispered to no one, is gonna break the internet. Back on the ballroom floor, the older woman in the front row reached into her clutch. Her hand trembled just slightly as she pulled out a folded envelope. She didn't look at it, she looked at John. He hadn't said a word, but something told her. Neither had she, not yet. And what comes next, she thought, might finally make someone listen. He waited. The ballroom had gone still, save for the occasional clink of silver against china as the waitstaff cleared half-finished plates. John Kennedy stood at the podium beneath a wash of amber light, his notes untouched, his posture easy, but anchored. The teleprompter scrolled silently, lines of pre-approved platitudes no longer relevant. He didn't look at it, he looked at the room, and then let the silence stretch, just long enough to feel like something was about to break. Then, softly, plainly, he spoke. We don't all come from privilege. Some of us come from pain, and that teaches better than any Ivy degree. No gasps, no applause, not at first. Just that silence, the kind that follows something so true, it disorients people. A beat passed, then another. And then it came. From the middle of the hall, hesitant but steady, a pair of hands began to clap. Others followed. It was not the polite, automatic kind of applause that filled political events. It grew, surging from the corners like a tide, until the whole ballroom pulsed with it. Some stood, a few wiped their eyes. The message had struck a nerve that years of speeches and slogans had failed to reach. John didn't smile. He nodded once and stepped back. The microphone caught the scrape of his shoes against the stage. As he returned to his seat, he passed Jill Biden, who was clapping, too, but slower, with a stiffness that hadn't been there before. In the audience, cameras panned across rows of astonished faces. Tweets fired off in real time, say I. One read simply, "Damn, Kennedy." Another posted a clip of the line, captioned with a single hashtag, "Pain over privilege." But at the front of the room, something deeper happened. The older woman in navy, the one who had watched the earlier exchange with such fierce attention, rose quietly from her seat. She held a folded envelope in both hands now, pressed against her chest like something fragile. Her cheeks glistened with tears. She didn't move right away. She just stood there, eyes on John as he settled into his chair. Then she turned, and with careful steps made her way toward the side aisle. The crowd parted gently, sensing something unspoken in her pace. She didn't look left or right. Her eyes were fixed on a young woman near the press table, standing slightly apart from the others, Clara. Clara was reviewing notes on her tablet when the woman reached her. At first, she didn't notice. Then she looked up. The older woman extended the envelope with both hands. Her voice, when it came, was almost a whisper. This was for someone who didn't make it. Clara blinked. "I'm sorry." "She wrote to them," the woman said, eyes glancing toward the stage. "To the office of the First Lady. She never got an answer." Clara took the envelope gently, sensing the weight wasn't just paper. Who was she? The woman smiled faintly, but it was a smile worn thin with grief. "My daughter. Hannah." Clara felt her throat tighten. What happened? She waited. The woman said, for a reply, for hope, and when it didn't come, she gave up waiting. Clara's fingers gripped the envelope tighter. It was soft from handling, its edges slightly torn. Inside was something old, something unanswered. The woman turned to leave but paused. "Tell Senator Kennedy I heard him, and I think she would have too." Then she was gone, swallowed into the murmuring crowd. Clara stood frozen, the envelope in hand, her screen dimming beside her, around her. The energy of the room was shifting. The applause had faded, replaced by something quieter, heavier, not just admiration, recognition. Back at the stage, John sat still, the edges of his mind sharpening. He had spoken from instinct, not strategy, but as the echo of his words lingered in the room, and the eyes around him changed. He sensed something else had been set in motion, something larger than himself. And in Clara's hand, trembling slightly now, was the thread that might just unravel it. Clara didn't open the envelope right away. She sat in the back of the car, the city moving past her window in streaks of amber and shadow, the noise of Washington muffled by glass and silence. In her lap, the letter rested like something too delicate to disturb, or too dangerous. John sat beside her, staring straight ahead, lost in the echo of his own words from the stage. Neither had spoken since the event ended. Neither knew what to say. When they reached the senator's office, Clara held the envelope against her chest as if it might dissolve if she let go. She didn't speak until the door clicked shut behind them. "It's from the woman in the front row," she said softly, "the one who came up to me after your speech." John turned. His jacket was off, shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms. He looked tired, but alert. "What is it?" Clara sat down and opened the flap. Inside, a printed email, folded in thirds, yellowing slightly, creased at the edges, a second sheet, handwritten, with the name Hannah Elise Murrow, 17 years old, Lafayette, Louisiana. Beneath the papers was a small USB drive. Clara hesitated, then plugged it into her laptop. The screen lit up with a video file. No title, just a timestamp from a year ago. She clicked play. The footage was grainy. A bedroom. Posters on the wall. A girl sat cross-legged on her bed. Looking straight into the camera, her hair was tied back, and her eyes wide, dark. Trembling, searched for something she hadn't found. Her voice was quiet. "If you're watching this, then I guess it didn't work out." Clara froze. John moved closer. The girl continued. "I applied for the scholarship 3 times. I wrote my essay twice. I met the deadline. I had the grades, but I guess I didn't have the right zip code, or the right connections, or the right kind of story." She looked down for a moment, then back up. "I wrote to the First Lady's office. I thought she'd understand. A teacher, a mom. I thought maybe she'd see me. But no one ever wrote back." The silence between words was unbearable. "I don't know if I'm not good enough, or just invisible. I don't know what hurts more." She blinked and tears slipped down her cheek. "I'm sorry to my mom, to anyone who believed in me. I'm just tired. Tired of fighting for a future that keeps disappearing." The screen went black. Clara covered her mouth. Her shoulders shook once, then again. John looked away for a second, jaw clenched, blinking slowly. He turned back to the email. The header was official, sent from Hannah's address to the office of the First Lady. It began formally, then grew more desperate. "I believe in education. I just need a chance, please." There was no reply. Clara whispered, she begged. John nodded, barely, and Washington shrugged. They sat in silence, the weight of the room sinking around them. Finally, Clara said, "How many more like her?" John didn't answer. He didn't need to. The real question wasn't how many, it was how long they'd been buried. He stood, hands on his hips, pacing now, the easy drawl in his voice gone, replaced by something sharper. This wasn't neglect. This was a design, a system that knows how to erase without making noise. Clara wiped her eyes and straightened. "Then we make noise." John looked at her, and for the first time since the ballroom, he smiled. It was a hard smile, tight at the corners. "We will—" He picked up the letter again, rereading Hannah's words. She hadn't cursed anyone. She hadn't blamed the world. She'd just asked to be seen, and no one had looked. Until now. And that, John decided, was going to change. Not just for her. For all of them, the storm didn't come with thunder. It came with spreadsheets. Clara sat hunched over her desk, eyes rimmed with fatigue, fingers dancing across her keyboard in a rhythm that felt closer to obsession than diligence. On the wall behind her, a map of the United States was projected onto the smart screen, peppered with red and gray heat points. At first glance, it looked like a weather system rolling in, but this storm didn't bring rain. It brought exclusion. Red marked rejection zones, zip codes where scholarship applications from high-performing students had been consistently denied. Gray showed accepted regions, a clustered pattern of affluence and proximity to urban academic centers. The divide was unmistakable, and it was growing. John stood nearby, arms crossed, his gaze locked on the screen. "You sure this is real?" he asked quietly. Clara nodded. "We cross-referenced scholarship outcomes from the past 5 years with census income data and zip code demographics. Low-income areas, especially in the South, are disproportionately denied, and not by a little, by a lot." John exhaled slowly. "This isn't just favoritism. It's targeting." "No one admitted it," Clara said. "But the numbers speak." She clicked, and a second screen appeared, an internal document leaked by a contact from the Department of Education. It was blandly titled Application Optimization Protocol. A list of algorithm parameters followed. Toward the bottom, geographic viability score, a formula assigning lower weights to applicants from zip codes with median incomes under a certain threshold. John read the line aloud. "Geographic viability. What the hell does that even mean?" "It means," Clara said, her voice cold now, "if you're poor and rural, the system considers you a bad investment." There was a pause, the kind that follows not shock, but realization. John rubbed his chin. "Who built it?" Clara opened a folder. The contract for the software went to a private tech firm, Civitas Logic. Their parent company is EdSpring Group. John looked up. The same EdSpring that lobbied against the Tuition Equity Act last year. The very same. He paced now. So a firm that wants to keep federal aid limited is also designing the filters that decide who gets help. Clara nodded, and they're one of the primary donors to the Foundation for Educational Excellence, the nonprofit that runs this scholarship program. John froze. That's the one endorsed by the First Lady. Clara didn't speak. She didn't need to. For a moment, John just stood there, the pieces clicking into place in silence. The whispers of influence, the silent gatekeeping, the algorithm that looked neutral, clean, clinical, mathematical, but knew how to avoid messy headlines by quietly erasing the undesirables before they even made it to a human desk. Then came the final blow. "There's someone you need to hear from," Clara said. Ooh. She opened a secure call line. A pixelated figure appeared on screen, their face blurred, voice altered. They identified themselves only as Reed. "I worked inside the Scholarship Review Committee." They began, "We raised concerns about the filter logic early on, specifically the geo-weighting. We noticed kids from certain zip codes, places hit hardest by poverty, and natural disasters kept getting auto-rejected, even with perfect scores." John leaned in. "You flagged this." "Multiple times," Reed said. "We were told the system had been vetted. When we pressed harder, the internal audit was canceled. The phrase they used was not mission critical." "Who canceled it?" Reed hesitated. A liaison from the office of the First Lady was involved in the conversation. It was a closed-door meeting. No minutes, but she was there, and we all knew who she answered to. John's face tightened. "You're telling me Jill Biden knew about this?" "She didn't design it, but she knew it was flawed, and she let it stay. Because pulling the program would have created backlash. Bad optics. The scholarship was a cornerstone of her education platform." There was a long silence. Reed ended with a single line. "She made a political choice, and kids like Hannah paid for it." The call cut out. John turned away from the screen. His jaw clenched, shoulders squared. The rage wasn't loud. It was deeper than that. A kind of moral nausea. This wasn't about party lines anymore. This wasn't blue or red. It was a machine built to smile in press releases while quietly telling the most vulnerable, "Not you." Clara stood up. "What do we do?" John stared at the map again, at the red zones, at the blood-colored shape of exclusion drawn across the country. "We show it," he said. "Bam, all of it, the filters, the maps, the design. We pull the curtain. But the pushback." "Let them push," John said. "I'd rather be attacked for fighting this than remembered for staying quiet." Clara opened a new folder. It was time to prepare for war, not against a person, but against a system that had learned to hide its cruelty behind clean code and polished speeches. And this time, it was personal. The studio lights hummed softly, casting a sterile glow over the rows of cameras and cables. John Kennedy sat at the sleek glass desk, the world waiting behind the lens for his next words. Tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't just a senator. He was the messenger of a truth too long buried, too cruel to stay hidden any longer. The producer gave a final nod, and the broadcast went live. John's voice cut through the quiet with steady resolve. "Good evening. Tonight, we bring you a story not about statistics, not about policy lines, but about real lives erased by a system designed to look fair but built to exclude." Behind him, the large screen flickered to life. A grainy video began, the same one Clara had found months earlier. The girl's soft voice echoed into millions of living rooms. "If you're watching this, then I guess it didn't work out." The room was silent, the weight of those words pressing in from all directions. Hannah's face, young and hopeful, yet shadowed by despair, filled the screen. The camera lingered on her eyes, those deep pools of unmet dreams, before cutting to a montage of rejection letters, each one stamped coldly with application denied. Does not meet criteria, or worse, the unspoken message behind the words. Then the screen shifted. The broadcast cut to a series of live feeds from teenagers across the country. Students whose names were unknown to most, but whose voices were raw with pain and frustration. One by one, they read their letters of rejection aloud, letters that offered no explanations, no apologies, just a bureaucratic silence. "I was told I didn't fit the profile," a young woman from Alabama said, her voice cracking, "even though my grades were perfect." A young man from Mississippi wiped a tear away as he recited a letter denying him aid, despite his mother's illness and their desperate financial need. The final voice belonged to a quiet boy from rural Georgia who simply said, "I tried to get help for my family, but the system said we weren't worth it." Across the country, families gathered around televisions, some sobbing, others clenching their fists, all listening. Social media exploded. The hashtag pain over privilege trended worldwide. Calls to the senator's office flooded in, from grateful supporters to angry critics demanding change. But not everyone applauded. The broadcast cut to a live interview with Senator Richard Caldwell, a prominent figure from the opposing party. His tone was sharp, his words cutting. "Senator Kennedy is exploiting tragedy for political gain," Caldwell said, arms crossed. "Using heartbreak to score points is irresponsible. We should focus on solutions, not sensationalism." John watched the screen, expression unreadable. When it was his turn, he leaned forward, gaze steady and voice cold. "I'd rather expose a wound than pretend it doesn't bleed." The studio fell silent. The stark honesty of his reply sent ripples through the political landscape. Backstage, Clara exhaled slowly, watching the real-time reactions online. The world was awake now, and the spotlight was fierce. But John knew this was only the beginning. The system had been exposed. But dismantling it would require more than broadcast moments. It would take courage, alliances, and relentless pressure. Still, tonight was a reckoning. The faces on those screens were no longer invisible. Their stories were no longer whispers in the dark. They were the truth, shining bright enough to demand justice. The television screen flickered to life in living rooms and offices across the nation. Jill Biden appeared, poised behind a simple podium set against the backdrop of a modest Delaware community center. Her emerald dress, once vibrant and commanding, now seemed muted under the harsh studio lights. Her hands trembled ever so slightly as she gripped the edges of the lectern, eyes scanning the sea of unseen viewers. At first, her voice was measured, cautious, the tone of someone prepared to defend rather than confess. "I have been following the recent investigations closely," she began, "and I want to assure the American people that the scholarship program has always been run with the best intentions." But the steady gaze of Maria Vasquez, the seasoned journalist sitting across from her in the adjacent studio, refused to relent. Maria was from the South herself, a fact Jill knew, and it lent weight to every pointed question. The interview was live. There was no escape. "Ms. Biden," Maria said, voice steady but firm, "you've been made aware of internal warnings about the filtering system, the biases that disproportionately rejected students from poorer areas. Why was this allowed to continue? Why wasn't action taken?" For a moment, Jill's carefully constructed facade cracked. She swallowed hard, her eyes flickering away before settling back into the camera's lens. "Because I was afraid," she admitted softly, afraid that admitting the flaws would unravel a program meant to inspire hope, afraid that criticism would overshadow the very people we wanted to help. Maria leaned forward, afraid that the politics of perception mattered more than the lives at stake. Jill nodded, a fragile breath escaping her lips. "Yes, I thought protecting the program was protecting the children, but I was wrong." There was a pause, the kind of pause that fills rooms with invisible weight, a silence heavy with accountability. Jill's next words came slower, as if each one was dragged out of a place deep inside. "I protected the institution, not the child, and that is my failure." Across the country, the cameras captured reactions in real time. Some faces softened with sympathy, others tightened with frustration. On social media, hashtags like hashtag Jill speaks up and had institution vs child trended, igniting fierce debates. Backstage, Clara watched the broadcast, a flicker of hope igniting despite the fatigue that clung to her. John sat quietly beside her, the lines on his face deepening. "That was honest," he said finally, voice low but certain, more than many expected. "But it's late," Clara replied. "Too late for Hannah." John nodded, his gaze distant. True accountability rarely comes without cost. But sometimes, admitting failure is the first step to redemption. The scene shifted to a candlelit vigil organized by grassroots groups, inspired by John's campaign. Hundreds gathered beneath the night sky, faces illuminated by the soft glow of flickering flames. Each candle represented a story like Hannah's, a life touched by the shadows of systemic neglect. John stepped forward, the murmur of the crowd falling into reverent silence. His voice was calm but filled with a quiet strength. "We have seen the cost of silence," he said. "We have heard the pain behind the numbers. But tonight we light these candles not only to remember those we lost, but to pledge that their stories will no longer be ignored." He raised his candle, and a wave of light rippled through the gathering, a sea of stars shining defiantly against the darkness. As John's words settled over the crowd, the cameras panned back to Jill watching from her home. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. The weight of her confession hung between them, a shared burden of responsibility and hope. The country was watching, waiting to see what would come next. The silence of years was breaking, replaced by a new dawn of truth and reckoning. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like real change was possible. The Capitol building loomed large against the gray sky, its marble pillars standing as silent witnesses to battles fought within. John Kennedy walked through its halls with a determination that had hardened over months of relentless pursuit. Today, he was carrying more than just a bill. He was carrying the voices of countless students, like Hannah, who had been silenced for far too long. The Zip Code Justice Act was simple in its promise, but revolutionary in its demand, and no federal scholarship program could use geographic location as a criterion to filter applicants. Every student, regardless of their zip code, deserved an equal chance at opportunity. But the path to justice was never smooth. In the packed committee room, John faced opposition from lawmakers wary of upsetting the status quo. Voices raised concerns about costs, administrative hurdles, and potential loopholes that could be exploited. Some suggested that the bill was an emotional reaction rather than a practical solution. Then, as the debate grew heated, the room door opened quietly. A woman entered, the same woman who had handed Clara the letter months ago, Hannah's mother. Her face was lined with grief, but also with unwavering resolve. She was invited to speak. With trembling hands but a voice that carried clear and strong, she told her story once more, about her daughter's dreams, her struggles, and the silence that followed her pleas. She spoke not as a politician, but as a mother demanding fairness and accountability. Her testimony pierced the room's skepticism like a lightning bolt. Members shifted in their seats. The emotional weight was undeniable. John watched from the sidelines, the flicker of hope igniting brighter than ever. When the vote was called, the Zip Code Justice Act passed with bipartisan support. Relief and quiet celebration rippled through the Capitol. Weeks later, John returned to Lafayette, Louisiana, the heart of the community Hannah had called home. A modest ceremony was held in the local community center. Families, educators, and students gathered, their faces lit with anticipation and hope. John stepped forward and announced the first recipient of the newly established Hannah Murrow Scholarship. A bright young girl, eyes wide with promise, stepped up to receive the award. The crowd erupted in applause. John held up a framed photo of Hannah and spoke softly but firmly. She didn't have a last word. This is it, justice spoken in her name. As the applause echoed through the room, John looked around at the faces, each one a testament to resilience and the power of truth. The fight was far from over, but this moment was a beacon. A promise that the voices of the forgotten would be heard, that fairness would no longer be a privilege of geography or wealth, but a right held by all. And for the first time in a long time, justice felt within reach.